Welcome back to another episode of No Shame with Shane. I'm your host, Shane Fordham, with all the shameless sports takes. Looking at the Commanders pick up Deebo Samuel in a trade with the 49ers in exchange for a fifth-round pick. Now, looking at this trade, I do think it was a good pickup for the Commanders. Having another piece on offense doesn't hurt. Another playmaker to surround Jaden Daniels with. Of course, in addition to Terry McLaurin, in addition to a revitalized Zach Ertz and Austin Eckler and Brian Robinson Jr., I do think this is a good pickup for the Commanders, but I don't think this is a groundbreaking move where the Commanders are now moving up in the ranks in the NFC. Now, with that being said, the Commanders, in my opinion, are top 3 in the NFC, top 5, inarguable. I think this year the Commanders will be a top 3 team, could be a top 3 team in the NFL, but I don't think that's not because of Deebo. Like, the Deebo move doesn't really move any needles for me in terms of, oh yeah, this offense is even better than it was last year. Like, I don't think Deebo makes this team any more of a playoff team than they already were. Like I said, I like the move. I think it was a good move. I think the Commanders could have done better. Like, obviously, I think Brandon Ayuk would have been a way better move for the Commanders. Now, to me, that moves the needle more. But I mean, it's cool. It's cool. I mean, it's not like it's like, as an Eagles fan, it's not scaring me. It's not like I'm not sitting up at night like, oh wow, the Commanders got Deebo Samuel. Like, this, like, a move that would scare me if I was a fan of another team would be when the Eagles got AJ Brown. That's a needle mover move. Like, that's something that would keep me up at night. But Deebo to the Commanders, that's cool. It's just it's all right. You know what I mean? It's all right. I think Deebo to the Commanders is an overall good move. They get a playmaker. They get a guy they can use in different ways, but it doesn't make them any more of a playoff team than what they already are, than what they were going into this offseason. Now, I feel like there's levels to it. Like, AJ Brown clearly changed the dynamic of the Eagles offense. Like, AJ Brown, with his route running capability, his ability to be a deep threat, but also to be a catch and run guy. Like, he brings different things to this Eagles offense, clearly making them more of a Super Bowl offense. Deebo Samuel isn't having that same effect on the Commanders. Like, Deebo Samuel is not a guy that can stretch an offense. He's not really doing much in terms of spreading the field to that level as what AJ Brown does, as to what that pickup did for the Eagles offense. Like, especially when you look at it in comparison to the Eagles, there's not much Deebo Samuel is really going to be able to do against us. Like, he's not gonna be a big play guy because Quinion Mitchell's locking that down. Like, he's not really going to be much of a midfield guy because of how good our linebackers are. Like, it's just like, I don't think Deebo makes the Commanders any more of a playoff team than what they already were before his arrival. But like I said, he's talent. I think it's another piece for them to use, but this isn't like an eyebrow raiser like AJ Brown coming to the Eagles. Now, with that being said, I do think that something that does stand out to me is just the Jaden Daniels factor. Like, I think that's what makes this trade the most significant, because I think if Jaden Daniels can make guys like Zach Ertz and Austin Eckler, guys who were on the verge of a decline, prior to this past season with Jaden Daniels, if he can make guys like that look like Pro Bowlers, I think it's safe to assume that Deebo Samuel is in for a revitalization himself as well. Because, I mean, let's face it, Deebo Samuel was on the verge of being washed. He was on the verge of being washed. I mean, towards the, like, for a good chunk of last year's season, Deebo Samuel looked like laundry. He looked like dishes. He looked like my car fresh out of the car wash. He looked washed. He looked clean. Like clean and scented. But, you know, I do think if there is anyone who can sort of, you know, add a spark or a second wind to a player's career is Jaden Daniels. I mean, just with how electric he was last season, being, I mean, y'all know how I feel about JD, being the greatest rookie QB of all time, having talents of a top 5, top 3 quarterback in the league. I think if there's anyone who can add that second wind to Deebo Samuel's career, it's Jaden Daniels. And, you know, I also think that this was both a good move for Deebo and the Commanders, but I think that Deebo benefits more from this trade going to the Commanders than the Commanders do. I think the Commanders do something more for Deebo than Deebo does for this Commanders offense. Because Deebo, this is honestly what Deebo needed in order to stay as relevant as possible in the NFL. Because of the decline we saw from him last year, you know, this is exactly what he needed in order to get that spark back, the spark that he needs to kind of get closer to peak Deebo, to the Deebo playmaking Deebo, the all-star Pro Bowler guy that we are used to seeing. So, I mean, overall, I think it's a cool pickup. But if I'm looking at that in comparison to the Eagles, like I don't think that's not striking fear in the hearts of anyone in Philadelphia at all. Like this it's just not. Now, the Commanders still have plenty of time to make different moves this offseason, and Lord knows they got plenty of money to do so this offseason, especially with, you know, in big part due to Jaden Daniels still being under a rookie contract, but playing like looking like an elite quarterback. A move that would scare me as an Eagles fan would be if the Commanders were to acquire Myles Garrett. If the Commanders acquire Myles Garrett, that would keep me up at night. The Commanders acquiring Myles Garrett is honestly in my nightmares. I mean, we're talking about Myles Garrett joining a defense that was really a much better defense than what people gave them credit for last year. You know, he's joining, you know, Jonathan Allen, Daron Payne, Armstrong, you know, on that front four group. Frankie Louvu, who's often used as an extra rusher. You know, they're keeping Bobby Wagner. They still have Mike Sanders still, Jeremy Chin, Quan Martin, like a solid secondary behind that group. But you take a solid group like what it was last year. You now add Myles Garrett to the mix. This defense, I mean, that's a scary defense. I mean, the last thing the Eagles need is for the Commanders, who were already a conference title threat last year. The last thing the Eagles need is for them to get a bona fide tier 1 defensive player in Myles Garrett, making them even more of a playoff team. Like that could really change their whole dynamic as a team, is getting a guy like Myles Garrett. Like, and then all they would need to do this offseason is to draft a DB, draft a corner, or even acquire a corner this year in free agency. I mean, guys like a guy like a DJ Reed who was available, like that would honestly scare me as an Eagles fan. The Commanders, our toughest competition in the NFC, getting a game-changing, game-wrecking playmaker in Myles Garrett, one of the best players overall in the NFL. That's one reason why that would be if I'm in that Eagles front office, like that would be one of my motivations to acquiring Myles Garrett, being aggressive and getting Myles Garrett. Now, from an Eagles perspective, Myles Garrett has obviously expressed a willingness and an interest to play in Philly, to be an Eagle. I think the Eagles, I think that would be obviously a great pickup for the Eagles, just adding to the plethora of talent that we already have. But one thing the only thing is, I don't see getting Myles Garrett, even if it means he becomes a Commander. I don't see it. It wouldn't be worth acquiring Myles Garrett if it means we are trading away some of the core young pieces from our defense. Like, if we're trading away really in my opinion, any of the current starters on the defense, it wouldn't be worth it to me, especially when it comes to looking at that Georgia group, looking at the Philly Bulldog group on that Eagles defense, looking at Zach Bond, looking at our rookies in Quinion Mitchell and Cooper DeJean. Like, trading any of those pieces away isn't worth it to me acquiring Myles Garrett, because of how these guys are growing together and developing together as a group. Being the youngest, despite being the youngest defense in the NFL, still being the best overall defense in the NFL at that as well. It doesn't seem worth it to me to break that group up to bring in, even for a guy like Myles Garrett, when there is clearly something special in Philly that is homegrown. You don't break something like that up. A homegrown, bona fide Super Bowl winning unit like that, where you really have another 5 years with this group, with these core pieces. It doesn't seem worth breaking that group up to me for Myles Garrett, even if it means he becomes a Commander. Now, of course, a motivation to make that work would be to prevent him from becoming a Commander. But I definitely think if we're trading some draft picks for Myles Garrett, make that deal. Sign that paper. If it's some draft picks, bring Myles Garrett to Philly for sure. Myles Garrett on this defense with the Eagles, nobody could stop this defense before. What do you think offenses are gonna be able to do with Myles Garrett added on top of that? You're telling me with Myles Garrett and Nolan Smith coming off the edge together, Nolan Smith only getting better as the season progressed last year through the playoffs, who is really has the potential to be a superstar in the NFL, with guys like Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis in the middle. Jalen Carter having the makings of being a superstar in the NFL, being just a bona fide stud in the NFL already, just in his second year playing, first year starting. Also, like, that front four could easily be the best defensive line in the NFL. That front four could be a better D line than what the Eagles had in 2022. With the historic season that D line had, with Hassan Reddick, Fletcher Cox, Javon Hargrave, Josh Sweat, like that could be. This could be an even more dangerous even more dangerous D line than that, because that D line didn't have a tier 1 superstar in that unit. Had a defensive player of the year candidate in Hassan Reddick, but Hassan Reddick isn't a tier 1 guy. Josh Sweat wasn't a tier 1 guy. Javon Hargrave, probably the second best player on that D-line at the time, wasn't a tier 1 guy. Myles Garrett is a bona fide tier 1 superstar in the NFL. So you would now have a tier 1 superstar playing with these young guys who are already all-star caliber players within their first 2 years playing, in Jordan Davis, in Jalen Carter, in Nolan Smith. That would be the best D-line in the league. Making it, and really adding that to what is already the best defense in the league. This defense didn't have to blitz one time against Patrick Mahomes in the Super Bowl. If you add Myles Garrett to a D-line like that, this D-line probably wouldn't, they would almost have, they would hardly have to blitz at all during the regular season if you bring in Myles Garrett. Like, think about that. Like, this D-line, I mean, the defense blitzed, had 0 blitzes called in the Super Bowl against one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game in Patrick Mahomes. You add Myles Garrett to that, how many times do you think this defense will have to blitz offenses in the regular season when you have that sort of force collapsing an offense's pocket, especially with having a secondary like the Eagles have in Quinyon Mitchell, in Cooper DeJean, in CJ Gardner-Johnson, in Reed Blankenship, Sidney Jones, Avonte Maddox, with the linebackers we have, a healthy Nakobe Dean, a rotating Wallace, Zach Bond, a defensive player of the year candidate. I mean, there would just be nothing that offenses would be able to do against this defense. This Eagles defense could really be an all-time defense if you add a guy like Myles Garrett to the mix. Now, looking at this Eagles defense, I do think that a focus of theirs does need to be bringing Darius Slay back for his last year. I do think that it does need to be bringing Darius Slay back for his last year. And I actually do think that's the plan. I do think that's the plan. I know he was released, but I don't think Darius Slay is gone for good. Because if you remember, the Eagles did the same thing with Fletcher Cox the year before he retired. Darius Slay, as many people know, has basically expressed that this is going to be his last year. He plans on retiring after this year, but that he would like to do so as an Eagle. He would like to go out as an Eagle. The Eagles did the same thing with Fletcher Cox that they did with Darius Slay this year. If you remember, the Eagles released Fletcher Cox so that they could restructure his deal in order to be able to afford different pieces, coming off the Super Bowl year, the year before he retired. They released him, but they brought him back. I think they're going to do the same thing with Darius Slay. Darius Slay is definitely that type of guy who is willing to restructure his contract, especially knowing and planning to be on his way out, willing to do really whatever it takes to be an Eagle. As he said he would be willing to negotiate and restructure certain things in his contract in order to be with the squad this coming season. I definitely think we're seeing the same thing. Like, I don't think Darius Slay is gone for good. I think the Eagles will bring Darius Slay back once they restructure his deal, giving him one more year with Quinyon Mitchell, really coaching him up, and Cooper DeJean for that matter as well, playing on opposite sides of Quinyon, where now we still get one more year with that tier one cornerback duo, having a blanket secondary. You have one of the best linebacker cores in the league with Zach Bond and a healthy Nakobe Dean. And then even just the current D-line we have, whether it's re-signing Josh Sweat and Milton Williams, or if it's trading draft picks and focusing on Myles Garrett, hopefully they can still make something work with Milton Williams. At least wouldn't be as much of a need to bring Josh Sweat back if you have Myles Garrett, especially since you have Hunt coming off in that rotation as well. I mean, either way you go, this Eagles defense has the potential to be even better than what it was last year. Having an even more developed Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith and Jordan Davis, guys who took significant step forwards in their development this past season, especially in regards to Carter and Smith, a defensive player of the year candidate in Zach Bond, and then a more developed Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, 2 defensive rookie of the year candidates. I mean, I definitely think the Eagles have something special here for sure. But But then also, if you're looking at, speaking of draft moves for the Eagles, I was watching the combine this weekend, and I gotta say, my eye is really on Bashal Tutin, running back out of Virginia Tech. I think Bashal Tutin could really be the steal of the draft. I mean, ESPN has him ranked at 17 in regards to running backs this year, in what is a really deep running back class this year for this year's draft. But I mean, this combine really showed Bashal Tutin is really one of the top 5 best backs in this class this year. I mean, running a 4.32 in the 40, finishing the combine with the fastest 40 time and 10-yard split time of any running back in the class, having the highest vertical jump of any running back in the class, being a guy who can demoralize a defense with his speed, but also be a physical guy. I think Bashal Tutin could really be a steal in this draft, and I would like to see the Eagles get a guy like that. I mean, I think even if he's not really used on offense because of, of course, Saquon's going to get his carries. Kenny Gainwell is going to be used in supplement to Saquon. I think just having Bashal Tutin being able to be a special teams guy for us would be extremely beneficial for the Eagles. Because now if you bring in Bashal Tutin, you no longer have to keep running Cooper DeJean on punt return. Like, you no longer have to put your premier rising DB at risk returning punts when you have an explosive guy like Bashal Tutin, who is prone to break one, who has the breakaway speed and the game speed to break one. So, I mean, I think Bashal Tutin will be a weapon for any team that gets a hold of him. But looking at the Eagles specifically, I think it would be a great pickup for the Eagles because now they have their bona fide special teams guy that they can use really on kick return and punt return in Bashal Tutin. And then, God forbid, if anything is to happen to Saquon or Kenneth Gainwell, you also have that explosive piece in Bashal Tutin where now you can rotate him into the offense itself. Where you can use him in those flare routes and schemes, Texas routes out of the backfield, where now you can use him as an Austin Eckler type of piece, as a Christian McCaffrey type of piece, where now he can be both a threat on the ground and through the air. Another aerial weapon to stretch the field out for Jalen Hurts to use. But speaking of Austin Eckler, I think it would be an even better pickup for the Commanders. I think if the Commanders were to pick up Bashal Tutin, I think they would. You now give them a succession plan for this backfield. Like, this backfield, the Commanders' backfield, when healthy, is definitely one of the best run games in the league. Now, that is in big part to Jaden Daniels and what he does with his legs. But looking at that RB duo, the RB duo itself with Brian Robinson Jr. and Austin Eckler, you get different things out of that backfield. You get a north to south guy, a head down, nose down type of runner in Brian Robinson Jr., who, I mean, is going to get you 5 to 6 yards after contact 8 times out of 10, an aggressive run through contact type of runner. Then you obviously have the pass catcher threat in Austin Eckler, who was a big part of that offense this year. I mean, Austin Eckler isn't getting any younger. Bashal Tutin could really take on that responsibility for the Commanders moving forward, after Austin Eckler kind of runs out of gas. You get a guy like Bashal Tutin who can do the same type of things that Austin Eckler can, but that is younger and has a little more pep in his step, a little more of that second gear in him, being a younger guy. You give a guy like that to Jaden Daniels. I mean, if Jaden Daniels can do what he did with Austin Eckler coming out of the backfield, imagine what he would be able to do with a guy like Bashal Tutin coming out of the backfield who runs a 4.32 on his best day. Runs a 4.32 in combination with a Brian Robinson Jr. type of running back, with with now in an offense that has a Terry McLaurin, a Deebo, a Diami Brown, a revitalized Zach Ertz. Like I think Bashal Tutin could be a great pickup for any team that is able to get their hands on him. But looking at I see something special already if teams like the Eagles or the Commanders were to get him. Like I can kind of visualize that now. I can see how he would already come in being a helpful tool for each of those teams. But it's going to be interesting to see. It's going to be a very interesting draft this year. It's going to be interesting to see how everything shakes out, especially with the draft, free agency, really this offseason as a whole. But that's all for today's edition of No Shame with Shane. If you haven't already, be sure to like, follow, and subscribe to all of our social media platforms. And I will always be back later on with more shameless takes.